we're asking this question about what does it mean to be in mission, especially in our context. So we unpacked that word, we understand that it's a word with a lot of background, a lot of history. So particularly, what does it mean in our context? And we connected that to this idea of the Missio Dei, which is this idea that we are only participating in mission when we are participating in God's mission. So if you look at the very bottom of page 1 there, you'll see our 3 belief statements about the Missio Dei. So this is work that is part of God that we are coming into. Mission goes out from God. Mission is God's way of loving and saving the world. So mission is never our invention or choice, which is a lovely way to frame it. This is something that God is asking us to be a part of. It is part of what God is doing in the world. So that's how we're using the term. And then last week we talked through some understandings of missional malpractice, how we get that wrong. Which there's so many ways in church history and world history that we could talk about. We particularly talked about this idea of the doctrine of discovery, of divine providence, of saying that we are a peculiar vessel meant for this, and so anything we do is right. That's a bad way of going about this. So doubling down on this idea that it is only when we are participating in what God is doing that we are actually participating in mission. So sometimes we get that wrong. And so being open to ways in which we have to constantly think through and discern our missional practices to make sure that they are still aligning and tying back to something that we see Jesus doing, which is where we get these 5 marks of mission that are at the top of page 1 there. And so we're gonna use these today, and then we also have these questions for missional discernment on page 1, which is where we got to at the end of last week, kind of talking about these different questions to help us critique our own biases, our own cultural awareness of where we are coming from, and what sort of patterns of missional malpractice we might be bringing with us that we're unaware of, or maybe are aware of and don't care, which is something that happens too. So that was a really heady 2 weeks. We went into lots of areas. We did some good theological grounding, but all of this is for naught if it's not, practical application of it. So what we wanted to do, and what we'll be doing for the next 4 weeks of this class, is talking to different expressions of this missional identity that we're trying to develop. So today we're going to start in our communal parish level. We've got 2 expressions of our missional identity. One is a brand new idea, which Jim's going to tell us about. So we'll be able to see what are the sorts of questions we want to ask of a new idea to make sure that it fits within what we are doing as a parish. And then we have one long-term expression of our missional identity, which is our Thursday lunch ministry, and Ed's going to be talking about that. And so, again, asking the same sorts of questions of like, what is this ministry? Why is it doing what it does? How does this fit into our understanding of God's mission? And what that requires of us as Christians. So that will be a fun conversation, and we'll ask some of these questions after they give us an introduction to these ideas. And then over the next 3 weeks, we'll do something similar. So we'll have a community partner come in next week, so someone outside of our community, outside of the Christ in St. Luke's community, that'll talk about some of the local work. And then we have from Episcopal Relief and Development someone coming in to talk about that organization, which is another expression of our denominational identity, a denominational expression of this missional identity, both on the national scale that we work at, and some international work as well. So we're looking at the hyperlocal, the local, the national, and the international. So that's the next kind of 4 weeks, just to give you a precursor of where we're going. But I'm going to stop talking now because I want to hear these 2 gentlemen speak. We're going to start with the lunch ministry. So please welcome Ed Zielagowski from the Thursday lunch ministry. Woo! You might need to turn that on, Ed. Just hold the button.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Right. Well, good morning. I'm thrilled and I feel blessed to be here to talk to you this morning about a lunch ministry program. It's a well-established program, but many of you may not know a lot about it. I see a lot of familiar faces, part of my team, and I'm thankful for you being here. The lunch ministry program has been around for probably 30-some years in our church, certainly since the early 90s. We've had many leaders, Doug Weymouth, who were very instrumental in carrying through this ministry. I personally started with it in January of 2020 when I retired, and as a volunteer. And later, a couple of years later, I took over and started to coordinate and act as the coordinator. The ministry has been around for a while, but we went through a period of tumult when we had the church renovations. Certainly with the closing of the kitchen, we had to adapt, and for 5 years we adapted. We served more of a bag lunch and provided food on a cart and groceries to our guests. And then during the COVID years, that's when the grocery bags became really important, when people were losing jobs more than the norm, a lot of food insecurity. We serve about 20 to 35 people a week. It varies based on their need. They get supplemental income from the city and or the state, and so in the beginning of the month we see fewer numbers, but certainly by the end of the month we see much larger numbers. We see typically 20 to 35 people, like I said, per week. But after 5 years of renovation, we met our hallelujah moment. The kitchen reopened, and we're thrilled to be back to running the lunch ministry in its fullness with the hot lunch program. That started back in the end of April of this year. The hot lunch program, certainly we utilize the kitchen. Even though it's smaller than it used to be, we found that it's very functional. We have to keep the idea on, watch on the number of people in there, but it's proved to be very functional. We have a dumb waiter that transport food and dishes up and down, a large pantry area in Lower Lloyd Hall. And we serve from the window there at Lower Lloyd Hall. There's a big stainless steel table, which is now our service area. Serve people from that area. The important thing about the lunch ministry is not only do we feed them, but we spend time in community with them, and that's a real blessing. Many people on my team, and some are more gifted than I, but they're very gifted at chatting and getting to know our guests. We all have personal relationships with them. I personally have a few people that I'm very close to. One was Sharon, who passed away a few years ago, but we touch their lives, I hope, but they also touch ours. And so the program is more than just about food. It's about people and serving serving and helping and aiding our neighbors. We currently have 5 lead chefs that work each week to plan and buy the food and take the lead in preparing the food. We have a team that sets up the Lower Lloyd Hall area for feeding our guests. And then we have a serving team that works to make preparations to serve and deliver the meal at the serving table. So far, I think we've had some really good meals. We've had hamburgers and hot dogs, taco soup, beef stroganoff. We had an Easter-like meal with a ham dinner. We've had chili enchiladas, Salisbury steak, and most recently, shepherd's pie. So we feed our guests well, and we hope we're meeting that need. One thing that's really that we get good feedback from the guests and those in need. They tell us they really enjoy coming here because at other places they tend to get soup every week, and here we make an effort to serve a different meal to meet their need, but to feed them, but then more importantly to be in community with them. In the summer we do have a low period where we shut down the hot lunch operation. So June through August, we'll go back to serving bag lunches and a cart, which is fully stocked with all kinds of protein and protein bars and all kinds of food that our guests need and want. The funny thing about that is that cart has grown since, I guess I was one of the people who started the development of that cart. And as our guests told us, or they mentioned, hey, I would like to have this. I seem to find a way to get it there. So the card is much larger than it was 5 years ago. But we'll do that during the summer months. We'll still allow our guests to come into Lower Lloyd Hall just like we did in the wintertime when we re-entered the building. We had them come to get out of the cold. We'll let the guests come in to get out of the heat and have time to eat their lunch. And again, it gives us an opportunity to spend time with them and find out about their lives and be involved in their lives. We have some interface with other faith or community groups. We're involved with the Ghent Area Ministries to provide excess items to them. We coordinate with them. We also work with the Norfolk Community Service Board. They put out a document called the Street Sheet, which you can see on both sides. It gives different services that are provided for shelter, employment, but it also lists food opportunities where people can go to get a meal if they're in need throughout the week. There's opportunities for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. There is actually one hole in it. Tuesday lunch is not met, but every other day of the week they can go somewhere and get breakfast, lunch, and a dinner meal. So we work with them. The other person we work with is the Williams School. They actually coordinated with us where they have their science program, and I think it's the 5th grade now. They work in the garden and behind the church and cultivate that, and they run that. And the food that they produce, we will use in our meals to prepare the meals. And in the summer, we give it away to the guests as they want. So the thing is, it's not just about food; it's about community and loving our neighbors as ourselves. And so I'm very proud to be part of this ministry. So.
Thanks. So before Jim goes on there, I'm going to introduce this idea just a little bit. So one of the things that we've been thinking about and wondering what we can do, especially as part of our Holy Listening conversation, which I hope you've heard about and have taken part of if you had the chance to do so, in terms of figuring out who's in our community and what is our response to those that are in our community, we've found that there is a significant number of people within this parish that are affected by Alzheimer's and memory care issues, and particularly thinking about how we can better support the caregivers of those that are working with Alzheimer's and memory care patients and loved ones. And so this is a new idea. This is not something that we're doing yet in a formal way, but it's something we're doing in an informal way already. So we're thinking of ways of how do we group this together in a way that understands our missional identity, understands that this is part of what God is asking us to do, but also that is sustainable and is actually serving a purpose for those that are in our care. So that's the question we're asking, and I'll stop talking now and introduce Jim Morton so he can give more background.
Actually, you did very well. Nicely done, Jared, for sure. And you've probably talked to my son, so he gives you all the background between Lynn and I. Good morning, and happy Mother's Day, by the way, and to all of you that are celebrating today. So it's a beautiful day for that event as well. As Jared said, I'm Jim Morton. Ed and I go way back. We started when we first came here as Stephen Ministers, another very caring ministry within the church. And we've kind of branched both of us off into these areas of particular interest to us. About 6 years ago, my lovely wife Lynn was diagnosed with dementia. Dementia, if you will, is the umbrella diagnosis for memory diseases. And at that time, I had no idea what the doctor was talking about, not a clue, and completely caught me flat-footed. After a lot of research and a lot of discussions and the like, I discovered that 60-70% of dementia cases are Alzheimer's, and that's in fact what her diagnosis was, and we've been the poster children for that combating that disease through the Eastern Virginia Medical School across the street and other places. So if you haven't seen Lynn on Channel 10 a couple times, then you probably still have that opportunity on the internet. 7 million people in our nation currently are experiencing Alzheimer's. 7 million. 1 out of 9 of us over the age of 65 are going to experience Alzheimer's. There are probably something in the vicinity of 12 million people like myself, like Diane and others, Kathy, David. There's many people here that I know of in this church that are caregivers. And we're spending, those 12 million of us are serving as a person that cares full-time for our loved ones during their journey with this disease. The numbers talk about 19 billion hours. That seemed like yesterday, but still, it's a lot of hours, it's a lot of time, and we do it, of course, very lovingly as we care for our loved ones. So, long preamble of numbers and the like, but why are we here? Is this caring for others that are, have a disease? As we know from our readings in the Bible, of course, that's exactly what Jesus did. There are many within our congregation that either are battling this disease or have questions about this disease. 4 out of 5 of us literally would like to know soon whether in fact we have it. Did a family member in fact have it? Do I have it? And if I do have it, what are my options? There's a lot of material up here, a lot of books. Jim loves reading, by the way, which is a disease itself. But I'm constantly trying to educate myself so that I do a better job. One of the things, and again, it goes back to the linkage between Ed and I, as Stephen ministers, is helping others, caring for others, listening to others. And if you're educated and you're reaching out to the right places, then I think a place like Christ in St. Luke's, an organization like this group and others, frankly, could be a great resource to someone who comes in. Imagine yourself sitting in that doctor's office, receiving that diagnosis, and just your whole world has suddenly been turned upside down. Now, where do you go? Who do you talk to? I've been very fortunate, frankly. As soon as Noah came on board, as he immediately embraced me and has been beside me with others, frankly, to help me deal with the stress and the needs that I have as far as caring for loved ones. I would suggest it should be a part of the mission of this church to do that. We do respond. We looked at the mission markers from last Sunday's lesson in here, and we talk about mission markers and responding to human needs. Teaching others about what they're confronting and comforting them and what they do. We're supposed to be, renewing life on earth, helping people with a sense of they're not alone, that there is someone walking beside them, that in fact there is someone that is caring for them and can help them in this difficult journey. And again, Jared said it at the very, very top, and it says, the question I guess in front of all of us is, should we be a caregivers support community? Directing caregivers, helping caregivers get their loved ones to the right type of care, answering questions. I have a journal. Journaling is great, by the way, because it helps me when I forget things. But I go back, in the back of my journal, I have a list of everyone that I have touched that is a caregiver and a care receiver. people who have been diagnosed with the disease and what type of disease they have. And I keep up with them. Not doing it every week, nobody can do that, but I do reach out to them periodically, and frankly, unfortunately, I've been to several funerals of people on that list, but I also reach out because either I learn new things or they have questions, and we want to be able to reach out. I want to reach out and help them. My suggestion is I think there should be some either further education, and you can start your education up here. I'll leave this stuff up here if you'd like to look at it, and also there's an opportunity to talk one-on-one on things like that. So I'll wrap it up and we'll go to questions for the next part.
What we're going to do now, I know there's probably lots of questions out there, and we're going to leave some time at the end, but and we can have a seat for this. This will be more of a conversation, Ed, if you want to come back and have a seat. I'm going to ask them both questions around these missional questions for discernment. So if you see those there on page 2, we're going to have a conversation about that, and I will make sure we leave time for your own questions about these two ministries at the end. So Ed, I'm going to come back to you first. I think you touched on this a little bit, but which of these 5 marks of mission do you think the lunch ministry aligns with, and why?
Well, the lunch ministry, we tried to reach out to people in need, both that are homeless or just in need of food in the community, and provide this warm and friendly, loving environment. But I think the number one area, Mark, I think is to respond to human need, a loving service. Like I said, it's not just about the food, it's about the friendships and the community we build with our guests.
Yeah. Talk about loving service. What does that, hone in on that?
Well, I didn't mention earlier, but we have, now that we're fully operational with the hot lunches, we have probably 20-some, more than 20 volunteers. 14 to 17 of them will show up every week because we have, you have things to do. And that's why I tell my team, I enjoy having a small surplus of people. Because then if you don't show up, you still have plenty of people. But the loving service, we could just feed them a meal and say, have a good day. But it goes far beyond that. We sit down with them, we talk with them, we find out their needs, we try to help them in any way we can. And like I said, we build relationships. Every person on my team goes beyond just saying hello or just a small conversation, but gets in relationship with people. Currently, and people on my team will smile, but mine currently is Ron. I know him very well, and I know some of his needs. I know some of his food choices he likes, and I make sure they're met. But we go beyond just providing a meal. We want to be there as neighbors, as brothers in Christ, and support one another.
Yeah. Question 4 of the missional discernment questions, I think, is an interesting one, and I think it certainly applies to the lunch ministry, which is where and when in the lunch ministry's context does the church or this ministry rise above the dominant assumptions or the reigning powers to bring a distinct and even prophetic voice to the public spirit? Does that relate to you at all? In the lunch ministry? I think there's some overlap.
Well, I do. I mean, we don't just follow what the public might think or the government might think, and we got to cut this program or do that. These are people, and we're told to follow Jesus, and Jesus certainly gave us great direction in, feed my sheep, to care for our fellow man, to love your neighbors yourself, and so I'm not bound by what the public perception is or the policy is. We will go beyond that to meet the needs and to care for those in our neighborhood. So it definitely applies to us.
Yeah.
I mean, that was one of the side ones I thought. I mean, obviously, number 3 also applies. How do I understand the cultural expression of my faith, and how do I understand that as expressing the faith according to the cultural resources of a given place, and how's that practiced? Like I said, we seek out to serve our guests as neighbors, and so we feel that's also met. Because it's all about, as you said in the last 2 weeks, the mission is important, but if we're not focused on what God's mission is, then we're missing the mark, and we're very much focused on that.
I like that, the cultural expression of your faith, which sometimes we talk about cultural expression as or any sort of expression as being, well, I need to go out there and talk about Jesus Christ and talk about how much God loves people. At least that's what an Episcopalian might do. But I think that there's an actual application. Right. And so that's what we see in the lunch ministry, is that it's an actual act that we are doing with people, not for people. I think "with" is the word that I'm specifically honing in on, is that this is a communal practice. Mm-hmm. And this is interesting. I'm following this case, and I think we all should, because it's very concerning. There's a church in New Jersey that recently applied for an expansion of a ministry to those experiencing homelessness in their context, and they applied to get a new facility built on their property, sprawling 11-acre property. And so they submitted this application to the city, and the city, in response, is now trying to take the property by eminent domain, to say that to stop you from expanding this work that you're doing, which is very much driven by your understanding of your cultural expression of your faith. What we are going to do is, instead of allowing you to do that, we're going to try and take your property. So that's a real-world application of talking about this is going against the status quo in a lot of what we're doing. And I think Ed will know, there's a lot of stuff that goes on with the lunch ministry. There are a lot of perceptions of the lunch ministry in our community that a lot of them are helpful and hopeful, but a lot of them also are like, I wish that wasn't here. And that doesn't go away. And so I think what is so helpful about this is understanding that this isn't something we're doing just because we want to, it's because it's directly tied to what Jesus has asked us to do. And so that's part of cultural expression. It's not just talking about our faith, it is living out our faith.
Well, I certainly feel called to it. Some of you know this story, but Doug Weymouth led this program for like 20 years, and I felt bad that I could never help out on Thursday morning because I was working in the shipyard as a senior manager, and I didn't have time to take off every Thursday. But I prayed about it, and I told God, when I retire, you own me. And that's why lunch ministry and Stephen ministry, I'm also involved with a grief book program we have and visiting program we have. I feel called because I made that, or God made that covenant with me, that once I retire, I'm in service to him.
Right. Well,
the other thing I like about it is the fifth one. It talks about the partnerships, and I talked about that with the GAM and Norfolk Community Service Board. We actually had one of their representatives come to one of our, because he asked if he could, one of our Thursday lunches, and he was table to table talking with our guests, trying to provide or meet their need, to provide services to meet their need. So we work closely with them. So that's an important, I think, missional question that we meet as well.
Great. I'm going to turn this over to Jim. And again, leaving time for your many questions at the end here. But Jim, for you, this new idea, and as we kind of walk through the questions of what it means to develop this group, where do you think the 5 marks of mission come in? Which one's aligned to you? You talked a little bit about that, but
yeah, I talked just a touch. Responding to human need was probably near the top of my list as I thought about this last week or so. In fact, how Lynn and I came into as a member of this congregation, as I was reaching out in a phone call, it's talked about my situation, my wife's situation, and this lady suggested how we should pursue her care. Her husband was suffering with Alzheimer's, and they had followed this pathway with success. And she reached out to me, prayed with me, and then directed me in the path that we're currently following, which I thought was a very timely type thing. So the opportunity to teach others, to comfort others. I mean, there are several. Again, renew the spirit of the on this earth. It just we have such a short period on this planet. And if we're not caring for others, if we're not using all of our energies and our skills to help other people, then we've wasted them in my mind. I think that my ability to read, research, and then speak and to offer suggestions and to guide sometimes, I think is part of it. All those things are things that have drawn me to church, why we attend here on a weekly basis, and why we're involved here. But this just seems like a natural offshoot of that research and that information to benefit others, frankly.
I'm curious about the fourth mark of mission there, to seek to transform unjust structures of society, to challenge violence of every kind, and to pursue peace and reconciliation. That's an interesting one to me in terms of how much medical rigmarole you must go through in terms of working with someone. And so part of this full story, I feel like, and expressing some of what it means to actually provide care for our caregivers is working through this heavily unjust health system that we have. So I wonder if that relates to you in any way.
Oh, it does. In fact, many of the phone calls that I have, I mentioned my list of caregivers and care receivers in my book, and many of those discussions are centered around, I'm lost, I think I have a doctor who's talking to me, but are they giving me the answers I need? Your primary care physician is probably not where, if you're dealing with dementia or Alzheimer's, is probably not where you need to stop, because their knowledge, unfortunately, is limited. If you get to a neurologists have tremendous skills, but they're not the ones that are focusing on the treatment of the disease and the treatment of your individual situation. Again, we bumped into this member of the congregation who broke us out of that shell and said, you should really be talking to a geriatric specialist. And I scratched my little head and said, what's that? And off I went from there. And then I found out that EVMS down the road has a whole program on this stuff. And the first time Lynn and I walked in, the doctor wrapped his arms around us and says, okay, I'm in charge now, and your care is my top priority. And we went from there. Talk about a tremendous relief. So once we felt like we broke down the system and he helped us break down the system of insurances, other types of care. I mean, the caregivers need care unto themselves. The care receivers, the people with the disease of Alzheimer's or any other dementias, they need their specific treatments and certain drugs and certain considerations. There are programs within the city and the local area that benefit you. There are respite programs for caregivers that need relief. There are certain doctors who can point you towards specific medicines. There are adult daycares. There are memory facilities, but it's got to be something that suits your individual needs. And yes, finding your way through that system is difficult. It's taxing on top of everything else you go through. But with a lot of prayer and a lot of help from a congregation like this and others around us, that you get through it, one day at a time, of course.
So then the third missional discernment question there, I think, is interesting. We touched on a little bit of the first part of it with cultural expression with Ed, but the second part of it, how do I practice this contextualized faith for the sake of those outside the church in my setting? So I think that might relate to this specifically. A bit of what we've talked about in forming this group is that it might be specifically focused on those that are already part of Christ in St. Luke's, but certainly would be open to others. But I also think we offer a distinct nature that maybe is not part of some of the other caregivers groups that exist is that this is connected to our faith and how we understand what's going on within our faith as well. So I wonder if you want to speak to that.
It's very true, yeah. And the concept that I've kind of sketched out in my mind is in many ways partnerships, much like the church has with the Williams School. There may be there is a program, as I understand it, Harbor Towers across the street again, for people that are dealing with dementia. There's a population, an aging population there, of course. Dementia is more likely as you reach above 65. But the nature of the care is, if it's part of us, is faith-based. I go to a support group currently have for the last 2.5 years in Chesapeake, and the lady who is my facilitator, who lost her husband to Alzheimer's, she brings a faith to it. It's not over, because people that come to this group come with the questions first and foremost, is how do I battle dementia? But they realize pretty quickly that there is a spiritual part of this journey to strengthen them and to help them along. They can embrace it or they can't, but the fact is those of us that do embrace our faith, we're praying for them and we're trying to be there for them and help them. So I do see a faith part of it. I think it's inevitable, and frankly, it's part of what gets me through every single day, for sure.
So we're gonna open it up to questions now because we got about 10 minutes left. But I want to just note, as before we jump into that, these questions can be helpful. I hope you've seen as we ask both of two different contexts about honing in on what is essential in this ministry that we need to focus in on that connects us to something larger. So if you have an idea and you kind of walk through these steps, you can start to put together, oh, this is why this is important. This is why we need to do it this way. This is why we need to include these people, because this is part of the fuller expression of what we're trying to do. So that's just some contextual application of this. But I do want to open it up to questions. Please do yell because we need the mics up here. Ginny in the back.
Thank you both first for your passion and your cause to the cause. My question is directed to Jim. Consideration as a church moving forward, they have a lot of walks with Alzheimer. Could that possibly be something that we pull together as a community or as a church?
You are not a plant, but the walk to end Alzheimer's is this September. They call it the Coastal Virginia Walk. It's held at the Jubilee Park in Chesapeake. I think it's the 21st or the 22nd of September this year. It's a wonderful experience. And the direct question is, could we form a team? Yes, we could. I'd be happy to kind of help head that up. Part of being involved in the walk is helping to raise money to support the Alzheimer's Association so that they continue to battle research and battle for the solutions to this disease. One of the things they have in the walk is flowers. The yellow flowers are for caregivers. The blue flowers are for care or people with the disease. And there's another flower for people who have passed. But the white flower is the hope that whoever holds the white flower, hopefully someone will be there that will be the first one cured of this disease. Because right now there is no cure for this disease. But the walk is a great way. It's not, you don't have to train for it. But you can train if you want. But it's a great way to be amongst people with a similar view, and it's a beautiful day in Chesapeake, so come on out for it. I'd be glad to get some information out. Also, the 21st of June is the longest day. And again, symbolizes what a caregiver goes through on the 21st of June, again, the summer solstice. And that's another outpouring of events that, again, support the greater context of the research and the care.
So I think it's a great answer to question 5 on here. So this idea of cooperation and partnership with others. We don't have to reinvent the wheel of everything else that's going on in the community around us. It's actually so important for us as part of our larger understanding of care, both for the lunch ministry and for this Alzheimer's group, of how do we resource with other people that are doing this good work in a way that supports the entirety of the community, not just our own, well, we're doing this because we want to. We need to do it because the church down the street is doing it. That's the wrong way to get into this. We're doing this as part of a full expression of who we are as a community. I saw a question right here.
I just wanted to say that I greatly admire your servant leadership. I think we could all be inspired by the fact that leadership with people is more powerful than leadership over people. I think I have both a question and maybe a recommendation, and that is, as we ask these deep communal questions to arrive at a point that's above my pay grade, candidly, I think the written word is powerful. I think the Bible has certainly taught me that. And so I would, if we don't have that for these ministries, I would recommend written word for, at the highest level, for continuity and succession, but also I think for community reflection. And so if we don't have those documents, I think that's maybe an important first step. And,
So you're saying written word as in the taking scripture and basing this in, or are you saying writing down some of these thoughts we've had?
Yeah, for the lunch ministry as an example, and say, well, maybe here's our mission, our vision, our values, the behaviors that we exhibit. How is that interconnected with the church's mission? And maybe as a basis, as a starting point, you probably already have those documents. If you do, I'd love to see them.
They certainly exist in some form or fashion.
We certainly could enhance them, but we established a code of conduct, and each volunteer signs that, and we live by that. And we've had challenges, and we use that as our guiding light to move forward. As far as other scripture and stuff, we start in prayer. We say grace prayer every Thursday. And also, Jerry's made available to me, we have Bibles available too for our guests. When they ask for them, we give them to them. But we have codified how we want to behave and treat not just our guests, but treat one another. So that when we have challenges, we can address that.
I just would just simply recommend, who's the next ed, and how do we serve that person, or that group of people that might be a composite of ed.
Right, and so sustainability is a big piece of all of these questions. I mean, if you look at 5, I mean, one of the things we are baking into our missional understanding is this piece of sustainability. So if we're not thinking through questions about what does the next phase of this look like, are we recruiting new leadership, are we inviting people in to make sure that this is something that can be life-giving and ongoing? Because that's another big piece of missional discernment, is that if we get so invested in the idea of the work that it's not connected to what God is doing, we can continue on in a way that is doing something but isn't connecting us to actual work. So there is a time in every ministry's life when you might need to ask the question, is it time for this to go away? Is this time for it to die? And that is okay, because we are people of resurrection. It's not to say that that will come back in the same fashion, but something new and life-giving might come out of letting all of your energy move and shift to something else that needs it. And that's a big piece of what we're doing as well. So thank you for that. I see a question on this side, yes.
Thank you both. This has been very eye-opening. I walked the path of dementia with my mother, and I walked the path of Alzheimer's with my mother-in-law, and I was a Stephen minister at my past church. So my question is, what kind of training, if any, does your group do, and what do you expect of the volunteers once they have this training? What is the direction for someone who'd like to be part of your mission?
I think what we've talked about, at least initially, is some form of caregiver support type of organization. That group can be a clearinghouse for information, certainly an opportunity to relate your experiences, your faith journey, and the value of your faith in what you've done with your loved ones, and then an opportunity to just listen to those that are new to hurting and dealing with this type of disease. There are multiple roles within that. Once we open the door, as we've done here this morning, is just raise the subject and then sit back and watch people who have been touched, and then provide that opportunity for them to tell their story. And again, I think your experience would be a key piece in bringing this in. And as a trained Stephen minister, you certainly are well trained on being able to understand people, pray with people, and certainly be there and listen with them. Ed and I certainly know that very, very well from our service, both as Stephen ministers and Stephen leaders. So yeah, I think it would be a great role in a caregiver support type organization.
We're unfortunately out of time, Chris. We're right at 10 o'clock. Actually, we're past 10 o'clock. So I just want to say thank you to everybody. Ed and Jim are going to stick around maybe for a few minutes after this, but they'll certainly be here after the 10:15 as well. So if you don't catch them now, catch them at the coffee hour. I'm sure they would love to talk to you. So all of those questions we didn't get to, you can ask them in person. I know they also both have sign-up sheets and information available on their various ministries and missions. So if you have questions about that or would like to be involved in either of them, please reach out. But thanks, everybody. We'll see you soon.